Hello and warm welcome to every one of you. I appreciate your continuing participation in the Reflective Dialectic and your intention to extract some utility from the process, provocations and propaganda that surround human diversity and life choice issues. I also welcome the digital community on the other side of the camera lens. My name is Philip and I'm presenting this Reflective Dialectic, the series both a practical and a lecture. And today is a lecture on race, racialism and racism. So it's going to be a heated debate. It's going to be a long one, so I think I'm going to split it into two. We're going to have a small break in between. These sessions provide a chart to navigate through the stormy conditions created by identity politics, being, sex and death. So that's what we're here for. And as I said, today it's going to be race. And it's going to be quite a violent one. So let me get on with it. At the current moment, there are three hot geopolitical battles going on in the diversity space, or the diversity war. The revolutionaries use a broken paradigm dialectic. Remember, we had that in the very first lecture, to attack Western liberal institutions. Now, what is this, or what do they do, these revolutionaries? They search for topics with less prominence but with a high potential to raise emotions. And they raise emotions to a level of insanity. And then create division under their target population. So they target a specific population. And they use race, gender and sexual fixations of the LGBTQ community to get to their goal, or to those other ones fit for purpose. Right. They aggregate these topics under identity and diversity politics to divide for political gains. So there's political gains and there's financial gains, which we'll have to keep in mind. And it's all about power. Remember, in the practicals on feminism, they said that clearly. The revolutionaries claim to propagate for the liberation of all the oppressed minority victims, but they then only go for the cream and deliberately deliberate the liberated. That's what they actually do. They deliberately deliberate the liberated. They ignore the politically less exploitable and therefore less profitable topics. Which are they? Which are ignored? Well, for one, age, I would know, and disability, which is another one, which is, in my mind, the big one. Now, what do I think about these revolutionaries? They are mostly useful fools for geopolitical master manipulators that benefit from global destabilizing liberal democracy countries, or democratic countries. Autocrats didn't die with the kings. They are still with us. They're still working with us. Right. As I already said, this one is a race. The remainder we'll do later on. Although race as identity concept was exclusively presented and analyzed within the revolutionary social construction paradigm, remember the one we had, the broken one? This presentation will present and analyze and synthesize the concept within the origins of knowledge dialectic. So, what does the origins of knowledge framework tell us? The race concept will be analyzed in accordance with ecological development, the Gaian intellectualism as an angle of incidence, as well as the mentally developed construction, social intellectualism, which is how we draw in from social constructionist paradigm in order to create a dialectic which is workable. And we're going to, it's not on my notes, but it should be there, we're going to synthesize by reflecting on the quality and the quantity of it. But that will be in the second part of this video. As I said, I'm going to break it in two, so that we can have a sip of water and have a bathroom break. Right, let's start then with the ecological development of race as angle of incidence. And I'm going to do it like this. Differences between living entities are a fact of life. There will always be differences. Although humans claim it for themselves, traces of living entities distinguishing in discriminatory ways are common in life. Race is one of many differences within living organisms. Now, what about the primordial exploration? You see, I've got primordial life. I'll explain this later on. I've drawn it to save time. These are patterns located in the primordial scientific exploration and environmental manipulation of organisms. Organisms, to survive, to thrive, they do all kinds of technical things. And we can go into that. It's a pretty interesting topic. But they manipulate the environment in order to survive. I already mentioned that humans are specific configurations of stardust, like all our organisms, carbon-based. We are stardust. We are no different than any other. Right. And we all have specific characteristics and personalities. And most of our organisms have got the male-female sex differentiation. Not all, but most. It's the most successful strategy. One species level, we share intra-species group differences. So on a species level, we show intra-species group differences similar to many other life forms on this planet. And that's what we call races, the interspecies differences. We also share cross-racial behavioral tendencies. So we might be mostly cultural differences across races. That's what I actually mean. Now, what's the first thing I want to look at as this primordial concept, which is general? It doesn't look at humans specifically. That's what I'm doing here. The first story is one of us versus them, or versus they. Now, we hear that every time, and it's as if my father generated that concept 100 years ago. Discrimination between racial types may be ancient and widespread. That's what I'm going to argue here. And I'm going to give 3 examples. I can give many more. The first one is going to be anemones. Now, it's a primitive sea creature when we look at it. Just a primitive sea creature. What they do is they fix themselves to a rock, with it, and when their tentacles filters nutrients that drift by from the we get it from the water as it drifts by in the water. Now, when an European beetlet green anemone, green, is in a nutrient-rich position, she buds off daughters, with the result that many genetically identical individuals amicably live in a tight group. So we live as a family together, and there's a lot of nutrients, and it's for all family. Now what happens is a red anemone of the same species, but it's a subspecies, the red anemone, comes along and wants to share in these nutrients. Well, as they make contact, the green anemone immediately become aware of a genetically different intruder and initiate a fight to defend their position, using a poisonous harpoon to rip the other apart. Pure racism within the anemone species, and there's a violent interchange. Right, that's one. The other one I'm going to look at is birds. There are subspecies of a booby bird in the Galapagos Islands, wherever that may be. The three subspecies can visually be distinguished by the different colors of their legs and feet. You get a red one, a blue one, and a green one. Color difference. Same with animals. Color difference. And what happens is, when we're going to pair, as one of these birds come close, a male bird comes closer to a female bird, he shows his legs and feet, and he goes like that, so that she can easily distinguish if they are from the same subspecies or the same race. And if not, then she wouldn't be interested. So this one doesn't end in violence like the animals did, but it's a distinguish for sexual intercourse and having children. For the birds, not necessarily for us. Right, I can also look outside the animal world. I know I've seen people saying that birds aren't animals. Please, birds are animals. Keep it in mind. Now, you get mother trees and in the dense forests. And what a mother tree will do, she will first help her own king to survive difficult times, and then her own kind, using a collaborative network provided by mushrooms. She sends nutrients from her roots and from her leaves to the small seedlings of her own. She knows it's her own because of the vibration, let's call it a noise, they make, their roots make. So she can identify the genetic makeup through that. So she'll look at her own first, but she also would look at other trees of her kind, and she can distinguish between friend and foe. And act upon it. They can also act upon it. Right, so what we can learn from these examples about race-appropriate and inappropriate behavior. Now remember, when I say race-appropriate, inappropriate behavior, I already drawn away from animals and I'm adding a moral concept to it, which is kind of a human thing. Okay, so what can we learn? Organisms often have gene variations at group level, with slight morphological and anatomical differences that can result in subspecies and race classification. There's nothing new about it. There's nothing only human about it. We're not that special. The mother trees, as do the animals, act as nepotists like matriarchs. So they act like matriarchs. Remember, we today speak about patriarchs. In the case of the animals and the birds, the booby birds, competition for necessities such as food, territory and protection happen interspecies or intersubspecies. So within the species they compete for the necessities, so across races. As can be determined from animals, it is a combination of a superior domination position, protection of resources, kind of greed, and nepotism that drive us versus the that or them behaviors. That's what we learned now from other organisms. Now, I've got counter stories for the us versus them. Now, the counter stories of species phobic or species xenophobic kind of behavior are especially prevalent in domestic crossbreeding. We humans have domesticated animals and we crossbreed. Now, if you look at dogs or cats, they have no concept of race like the birds of animals do. It is partly true that much of his competition for food and water as resources, which are vital for survival, is toned down by the fact that we supply them with that. They don't have to fight for it. So there may be, we're not sure, there may be in evolution, but the race competition is due to the lack of resources, and that's why dogs and cats don't have it, or it can be a time thing. Because we've been domesticating dogs, I think, for about 7,000 years. I'm not sure, don't quote me on that, but it's something like that. From wolves. It took me a long time to accept that all dogs came from wolves, but eventually I had to accept it. The evidence was just too much for me to keep on with my own ideas. Right. Dogs, for example, were wolves until human environmental manipulation brought about the species dog. So we brought about the species dog from the wolves. And then we were not satisfied and we start classifying them into different races. And why did we do that? We set a standard for each dog breed from a specific morphological appearance, a color range, or a coat style, and a strong characteristic that afford a specific functionality to what we wanted. So we decided what functionality we wanted, or utility, and what personality we wanted. And that's what we breed accordingly. So this is a desired utility because, after all, domestic animals have to serve our needs. Now, there are guard dogs and there are miniature companion dogs. There are retrievers and herding dogs. So herding dogs do a lot of work getting the sheep together. And some utility dogs, like gun dogs, go and fetch whatever the hunter shoots. So dogs are a utility to us, each race, and that's what we breed for. Thus, as humans, we manipulate interspecies genetic variation to achieve different functional outcomes. We do that. It is possible in nature. Evolution can do it as well. Humans are no different when it comes to race utility. I'm sorry about that. Something just looks strange for a moment, but it's not strange. Or maybe it is, I'm not sure. Where were I? Humans are no different when it comes to race utility because due to geographical differences, evolutionary interspecies genetic variations were achieved for optimal functional outcomes. And when you go to the mountains, the Himalayas, local people there have got a kind of a thicker blood, and which makes them more able to live in the oxygen deprived areas. And the very common one, people in the areas where the sun are really harsh, has got a higher pigmentation to protect their skins or to protect their bodies against the sun rays. So that happened. In modern humans, and that's what we are, archaeologists and paleontologists have identified a number of subspecies that shared the planet with us. So we were not alone. We're part of subspecies, or let's call it ancient races. This was about 300,000 years ago when Homo sapiens came onto the scene in Africa, and today that is generally accepted. And then we met with Homo neanderthalis and Homo denisovan and Homo naledi in Africa. Now, I mentioned Homo naledi. We're not sure yet where they fit in, but they were recently discovered. They've got a whole lot of fossils, and they dominate social media. So we have to speak about them. The Neanderthals and the Denisovans, I've got them here. Neanderthals, the Denisovans, and the other. I'm not sure which ones, but science will get to it soon. Where am I? Okay, have gone extinct about 50,000 years ago, but Europeans of today have small amounts of genes from the Neanderthals and the Denisovans. And this is what happened. The Neanderthal genes you will find in Europeans. The Denisovan genes you will find in Asia, Middle East, and Southeast Asia. So we as modern humans have genes from two different sister species, at least two sister different species. I think there might be more, but that will only be known in the future at some stage. So maybe we shouldn't say that they went extinct because we've absorbed them. So there was two ways of getting rid of your competition. It is killing and procreation. That's the two ways. Now, can we start to define race? And I can say, therefore, race is the morphological, physiological, and even functional outcome of breeding patterns over a relatively long period of time. Plus, the selection limitations such as geographic isolation and the environmental adaptability of that specific species. So here we've got a definition of race. There's quite a few of them, they differ slightly. So let's go to the next one. In an open, equal opportunity environment, genetic variation cannot form group-based differences. So if there's nothing special about the environment, it's all the same everywhere, then group differences will not happen except for beneficial mutations and only beneficial mutations. But that is a very, very small part of the whole thing. So normally you'll just find one species if it's an equal opportunity environment. Now, in a diverse environment, distinguishable breed types becomes highly plausible. This includes geographic conditions, we had that, local dangers such as, say for instance, malaria, language, people at war, and limited access to opportunity, which is a resource reference. So for a specific species bifurcation, it will take complete isolation over extensive periods in evolutionary time. So that's how you get to a species, except in the case of the dogs, where we intervened. Probably the same goes for cats, but I'm not sure. So let's rework this definition slightly. And I'm going to put it like this. The existence of perceived races is then a morphological, psychological, and functional outcome of evolutionary survival strategies that hardened the species in isolation across different global environments for a reasonable amount of time. It's very much similar, but there's only a few very small distinguishes. Now, it's not the end of it. Race is when a specific genetic compatible interspecies variation. And I'm specifically saying this because you'll hear these arguments that no, there's no genetic differences between races. It's just not true. And then they soften it by saying individual differences are bigger, which may be true, but the fact is there are genetic differences. Two major ones we've seen is the East and the West, the Neanderthals and the Denisovans. So, and I hope you really like my earth. I'm really good at drawing by the looks of it. Now, however, racial differentiation can be the seed for species differentiation given a long enough time. But there's a counter to it. If they are integrated, then the species differences or the race differences will go away because of, let's call it coupling for now. Procreation. Right. These variations lead to behavioral race discriminators. Now, let's look at skin color. I'll look at it again a little bit later, but for now, we've got whitish, which is West, North, and Central Europe. We've got bronze-like, which is the old Egyptians, Arabia, India, brownish, which is Southern Africa, blackish, which is Ethiopia, Sudan, Central Africa, and yellowish, which is China. Now this is just a very broad distinguishing factor, just showing different skin colors, were historically not perceived as different races. So those color differences were only seen as regional differences or nations, and because they shared trade and similar technological advances, because they could trade, they had things in common. They were not discriminated against on physical features as color. Now, it must also be stated that skin color, which is pigment density, is not really black or white, but it's actually shades of brown. I do have pigments, and I can go into the sun and get brownish, and we do that. We call it a tan. Yes, a tan. So the differences are very, very, very limited. It's actually a spectrum from lightish to darkish. There's also not a completely black, which would be a no color at all, or a combination of a void of color, something like that. Ask an artist. Right, discrimination was at the level of a local tribe member or distance known of foreign. So discrimination on the us, them was at the tribe level originally. It's highly probable that race defined by physical attributes only became a discriminator measured during the area of European exploration or trade routes across the sea. And it happened for a reason. And it says contributing factors were the contrast in technology and cultural complexification. They didn't have the big ships we had. And on first contact with the local people, as well as the greed and self-righteousness of these Christian explorers, they needed a way to discriminate, and race came about. So I think it was more of a technology difference than anything else. Now, just a summary of what I've just said, because I've said a lot. Humans are equivalent to most other species with strong entity-specific characteristics and personalities within a species context. Physical and sex role differentiation within a male-female context. Intraspecies individual and group differences in a geographic context. Cross-race behavioral tendencies versus culture in an environmental utility context. So you see, it depends on the context. As then behavior within an evolutionary time context. Right, that was now the bullet point summary. Now let's look at racial evolution. If you're against even the word evolution, or whatever it may mean, you're going to have great difficulty in following what we are trying to do here. And I had this before, where a student came to me and said, I really don't want to do psychology anymore. And I was thinking, somebody like me, she hates Freud and she hates Jung. No, it wasn't the case. We trained them evolution, and she couldn't go with that. The earth was something like 6 or 10,000 years old, and that was it. Then it makes it very difficult, because then all the reasoning I'm giving here just falls apart. Now, but let's stick to what we've got. And I'm talking about racial evolution. Species bifurcation requires complete isolation, we've said that, over extensive periods, we said that, in evolutionary time, and if any one of two interrupted, racial differences is the outcome. So, if it's interrupted, when you get racial differences. If it's not interrupted, you will get species differences over a period of time. Thus, race differentiation is a form of the genetic variation within a species population. Race utility is a function of evolutionary intraspecies genetic variation achieved for optimal functioning survival outcomes in the context of geographic differences. Remember, we spoke about the Himalayas, the blood, and also the malaria resistance in nations which lived in malaria areas. They could get malaria, but less so than when we got there and went into malaria areas and had no way to fight against it. Now, neither species differentiation nor race utility are possible in an open, equal opportunity environment. Remember, we had that. Race is not a hurdle that prevents crossbreeding. Note that Neanderthals and denizens are now Homo sapiens. So, race is about genetic gene intelligence variation. And that's different to individuals, where what I call Sheem's intelligence also play a role. This is the electrochemical processes within the body, within the cells of the body. Right. In a global context, modern humans can be divided into three known genetic groups. And I've already told you, the Asians, the Denisovans, the Europeans, the Neanderthals, and the other. In Africa, we don't have any one of those two, which was our subspecies, sister species in the past, but they may have others which we haven't identified yet. So, I've given you the race definitions, so I'm not going to repeat them, they are repeated here. Right, race is wrongful discriminator. And again now, what am I doing? I'm putting a moral aspect to it. So moving slightly away from my general organism idea. A race discrimination by pigment density, I've already said there's no such thing as pure black or pure white, but rather shades of brown. And I've already said that the skin differences didn't make in the bronze area a big difference because they had the same technology and they did trade, so they integrated with each other in various ways. There was a connection. Now, race is then not conceptually strong because of contributing factors, with a contrast in technologies, culture complexification in the first contact with local people, as well as with greed and self-righteousness of Christian explorers, as I said before. But I've skipped that. Now let's actually come to the human-specific psychological, mental and functional development as a function of learning within a race context. So what do we learn about race from a cultural perspective? The natural evolution of race as a concept of human similarity and difference has to do with human divergence and convergence over eons of time and over vast distances of geographic isolation and adaptation. It took Homo erectus a long time to move from Africa through Asia towards Australia and through Russia, let's say, to North America. It took them a long, long time, and of course, Homo sapiens followed, but we'll get to that later. So, racist narrative is part of a group concept which relates back to ancient ideas that formed to protect tribal life. So, this is this whole as-them strategy has to do with tribal life. Leaders of a tribe cautioned its members against visitors from outside. The tribe, who were not well known and trusted, didn't know them. They get there and people are kind of wary of them. Visitors were treated with some skepticism and in some cases with violent rejection, like the animals. So the concept of us and that, or them, is as old as our ancient ancestors who experienced others as an existential threat. This is the first important fact to remember. In ancient past, foreign people you didn't know, was treated as a possible threat to the tribe. So now my question is, are there any differences within the Homo subspecies and through races in our capacity to learn? What's the differences? We talk about that from time to time. So, Homo sapiens story of a learning of modern man. That's the first thing I'm going to say. As Homo sapiens, we inherited the technology of fire, as well as stone, wood, and industries from our ancestors. For example, Homo erectus, with its approximately 9 subspecies, were around at least 2 million years old ago, and populated large parts of the world. And they could make clothes, fire, made specialized spears, constructed dwellings, as many species do, made tools from stone and from wood, and created art and decorations, which is kind of a human thing. This was inherited by our ancestors, Homo sapiens, and we had to kind of work with that and improve on that. And as I said, it's about 300,000 years ago that Homo sapiens came onto the scene. So the Homo sapiens, us, went ahead and conquered, colonized, and occupied every continent of the world, denying the other Homo erectus populations living space. So we as a species went out and took things from our sister species, and we took their living space. Whether we made slaves of them, I'm not sure. I wouldn't know. As Homo sapiens, with this natural tendency to explore and occupy more and find land to extract its resources, it means that some communities became geographically disconnected and independent, while other communities remained in the area connected along busy trade routes. So we did the same that Homo erectus did. Explored the world, and what happened is some species became isolated, like the people in Australia, like the people in North America, like the people through this island chain, and like the people in the southern part of Africa. And I'm going to say south of the Sahara, because the Sahara weren't a desert at the time. So some isolated species happen. It can be deducted that those who could share in information flow and innovating along the trade routes that connected productive centers developed quicker, technological wise. So the isolation also caused a lack of technological development within that groups, because there weren't this competition and the sharing of information and sharing of goods. Right, so trade did a lot for us. The more environmental stresses occurred, such as drought and ice, the more a specific geographic group will be pushed to cognitive innovate. So if your environment is relatively quiet and food is relatively available, your chances for technological development is less. Remember, I'm not talking about intelligence here. We'll get to that. That's very, very different. However, all the Homo sapiens species groups developed mentally and technologically, and increases in brain size, and as well as decreases about 30,000 years ago, affected Homo sapiens globally. And that's what I just said. Even if we, and I just don't understand this, but as we spread along, got isolated, our brain sizes increased, and about 30,000 years when we were differentiated, our brain sizes decreased slightly, but it happened globally. I've got no idea why, but that's what the facts tell us today. Right, what can I say about, in identity politics, the debate is hot and the opposing opinions entrenched. So what information do we have about that? In the realm of social intellectualism and identity politics, the answer is that differences based on race are mere opinions. So all the arguments we've given up to now is just thrown into the dustbin, far 13, because it's just my opinion. The evidence doesn't count. But when we reflect on the real world and the ecological development and Gaian intelligence, brain size and structure change globally in accordance with physical expansion and detraction of Homo sapiens brain. We've just had that. Therefore, the brain structures and relative size are the same across all races and cultures. So maybe that gives them a reason to think that it's mere opinion. To me, it's still unknown why it happened like that. And I think this idea that we are, even if we were technological different because of isolation, intellectually we were the same. And I think that's the second important idea to remember. And it's especially so for policymakers and managers towards learning and organizational and technological skills. We must remember that. So the individual differences is more important than the group differences. And now I sound like a critical race theorist, but it's just a fact. Now, and that doesn't mean that I agree with them. It's just that one point which is the same. Right. And let's continue with integration. It means that given even the most remote tribe, the tribe members can fully reintegrate into the global organization and technological social world within a single generation. So, in South Africa, we've got this, let's call them a First Nation, um, with their bows and arrows, and many of them are still hunting on the open fields, still in their little cultures and tribes. But you can take a child from there, and that child can get the same opportunities and will be able to do the same thing with the same opportunities than the rest of us. So again, I'm getting back to the IQ, and I'll get back to it right now. If all brains are equal, then why is there no equality in the IQ and learning of modern man? We got IQ tests, and if you want to go for a certain job, they'll do this IQ test and decide whether you can get your job or not. It is a individual thing, it's not a racial thing. As I've just told you, you may have a backlog in the way you were raised, nurturing part of it, but that's all. So there's no real difference from my perspective. It's unfortunate that the explorers were ignorant of human development history and information space and used what they could see on the ground to make this difference. And as I said, I think greed played a role. And also, they could morally justify what they did by creating these races. Right. Now, all brains are equal. Kind of. Integration between sapiens and earlier subspecies account for some of our differences, but not all. Social pressures of population density, that's very important. Social organization for order and peace, as well as weapons and wars, accelerated learning. So that competition between humans. So did work organization and innovation in, for example, civil construction, agriculture, mining, metalwork, writing, and specifically high levels of trade. Now, when I mention civil construction and agriculture, I want to say that the ants do the same thing. We're not that special. So, what I want to say is that both social and economic organization may have influenced mean intelligence levels over long periods of time. But it's not permanent. The brain is a very flexible organ. Now, we also, another thing which helped us a lot to innovate and develop our brains, we gazed at the stars. We wanted to know the stories of the stars, that mystery. We wanted to solve it. And we wanted to solve it for reasons like to explain away experiential and social voids in knowledge. Explain away. As well as defeating evil forces using spiritual practices. So the stars became kings and queens, and some of us became, depending on your birth, you were associated with a certain star, and that made you, give you certain personality characteristics, things like that. We also make predictions of future conditions for health, ruling powers, and immortality using the stars. To make season and weather predictions to manage our food security, that's another reason why we looked at the stars. And then to navigate, that's the common one. And all of that helped our brain capacity to grow. Now we know that isolated peoples, like in America, also gazed at the stars. And also making sense of it when we, let's say, explorers found them, or engaged to them. So if all brains are equal, then why is there debates around racial equality? I don't know. As I said, for me, there's a slight difference, and it seems to be the truth, between those of us with Neanderthal genes and those of us with Denisovan genes. And sorry to say, but it seems that the people with Denisovan genes, which is Arabia, Egypt, Middle East, India, China, have a slight advantage over the Europeans when it comes to IQ. Why it's like that, I'm not sure, but it seems to be like that. So the mean differences attributed to groups do not tell us anything about IQ of an individual. So you have to test the individual. You can't just say this person is that race, so is more intelligent or less intelligent, although we do that. But it's actually not very scientific. Right, even if nature determines IQ, and that as predictably by race, the fact is that our naturally high interrelational sexual activities will average out the IQ very soon. Same with skin color and genetic differences. We have a tendency to have high interracial sexual activities. And also high mobility these days, and very low sexual morality. So yes, it happens in no time. No, that's, yeah, I see that it can be seen like that. But when I'm saying that sexual morality, I'm not talking about the morality of not having sex between races. I'm talking about just having sex in general. We love doing that. That's who we are. We can do it anytime, every time, not like certain animals where we've got certain times of the year where things happen. Right, let's see, where am I going to next? Now, I'm looking at the nature-nurture debate, and I'm going to say the following about that. And it's still on intelligence between race groups, and that it's of little value because it excludes too much. So talking about race differences, intellectual differences between races excludes the following. It misses an evolutionary time frame over generations. New innovations and technological developments, which is new things, novice things. Unpredictable environmental changes, which is variation within nature. It also misses unexpected social restructuring, organization, from tribes to kings to democracies, and social governing structures, which is a notarial kind of context, which is your ID number and social security and things like that, health, treatment, all those kinds of things, and schooling. In other words, intellect is a complex, dynamic, and chronobiotic phenomenon. My take is that even if high IQ is predictive of some categories of success, it may not successfully be predictive of more inclusive meaning making and wisdom. So that's my take on it. Other people will definitely have a different viewpoint. Now, given our technological advances and medical engineering and engineering in general, AI and robotics. We're now getting cyborgs, a person which has got steel legs or plastic hips, something like that. And we've got humanoids, which are robots acting like people. And my question is, will humanoids and cyborgs seed a new race, seed a new species? I don't know. In addition, humanoids competition may eliminate race ideas and start a new human identification. So race will fall away between the humanoids, and the differentiation, which will be there, phenomenon may be along brands, and brands will then be the debate metaphor for political activists, not race. So we're looking forward to the end of race very soon, and that's the very next important thing to keep in mind. Right, let's continue for a while. I want to look at the other side, this psychosocial transformational performance of race as an angle of incidence. So we've now completed this spectrum over here, and we're now looking at what humans think. So that's our way of making the antithesis. This is a thesis. So the antithesis is what we're now going to look at. And after that, we'll take a short break. Now, race is a hot enough topic and can be cooled down within this psychosocial performance angle of incidence when we look at the origins of species, the origins of knowledge framework, and not the old paradigm one, which just caused interruption. So, looking at the origins of knowledge, what can we say? The psychosocial performance information, the intelligence patterns, which is anchored in supernatural explanations and hypersocial arguments, do facilitate discrimination on the grounds of perceived race differences and similarities. So we've got two things here. And remember, we had it in, I think, lecture 3 or 4, where we have, in a psychosocial transformation, we have the supernatural explanations, religion, and the hypersocial arguments, which is like the critical race theory people, the feminists. So, now, race as a function of culture of origin provided Europeans and explorers the difference between races. And an extorted reality, actually. So, what next? Race became key to exploit the opportunity and to exploit the local labor and extract the mineral and agricultural resources from the people they came across. That's the European explorers. And race opened this opportunity because of the locals who the explorers engaged with, and the technological differences, as we said before when I discussed this. So it became a narrative. And the unfortunate thing about it is that they then connected it to their God and created a superior nation and let's call it the slave nation in their minds. So that's what we're talking about as well. Now, the problem is that the broad Western democratic culture awakened to the race phenomenon as human similarities and differences became hypersalient and super relevant. Remember when I said in the Bronze Age, it was neither salient nor super relevant. It was just part of life, and we were all traders with different goods. Now, that changed within this critical race theory argument, because now it becomes hypersalient and super relevant, and the reason is that we can draw benefit from it. So it's important. Any and characteristically human, our complexified dominant emotional sense does an analysis for us. That's what makes it salient and super relevant. In terms of our race narratives, the delusional tendencies inhibited the outcomes to unfold in accordance with the known emerging evidence, but just ignore that, to reflect the most plausible facts based on critical observation, experimentation, exploration, and critical testing, which is what science kind of do, and to tone down its relevance and salience to match the context. So this is actually a critique on the phantom constructions of critical race theory, as well as, and what happens in religion, where there seems to be super races and as I said, slave races. Therefore, our psychosocial transformational performance narratives are emotion-shifted and intensively mind, faith, language, tribe, and clan-centered. Race as identity and human diversity category became super evil in the minds of advocates, radicals, and revolutionaries, who often populated the popular social media space. And that's the problem. They make it salient. They protest race as a thing that is a weapon for inequality and their indoctrination into the dogma or ideology, and their position without even a few slivers of valid information as evidence. They cannot be influenced by rational reasoning and plausible evidence. So, unfortunately, that's a problem. Psychosocial transformational performance narratives are mentally developed with strong emotional satisfiers. So, this mental developed and projected realities includes the following: do not have to subject information to the laws of nature. So, gravity is not a thing. Biology is not a thing. They do subject diversity information to laws of man with moral guidance of pure conduct, ethical frameworks of civil and professional conduct, and also cultural etiquette for diplomatic conduct and legal frameworks to judge and punish wrong behavior. So, thus, the laws of man emphasize moral purity within supernatural mental patterns and legal, ethical, and etiquette within hypersocial patterns. Now, let's look at the supernatural specifically. I've now just given an introduction, unfortunately. Now, differences and similarities, as we said, in organisms are ancient, recognized by many species and present in almost all human populations down to tribal level. So this holds for even the most remote tribes. And then I'm going into what I've already said about the Europeans, explorers, that looked at these people they came across who still got ancestral spirits and primitive creators, like trees, for instance, and the stars, and they became the they towards the explorers as the us. Now, the us versus the they became so salient in the minds of tribal leaders as they begin to demand protection against unfamiliar tribal cultures and spiritual practices. Remember, we had that. Right. As tribes became part of the civilization in ancient times, a god or a pantheon of gods and a god king became the collective identity of official gods. Remember, in European times, we had that. The ruler as God and the subject to the ruler became superior because they were created by the God to rule over all others. European history, since the year 0, the times of Jesus Christ, up to, say, about the 1700s, that's the story. We have it there. Right, the previously local us-other duality within a superior us now had regional acceptance as well. So it spread over regions. Humans were not created equally, and lesser human-like creatures could be enslaved. That was what the thinking of Europeans from a spiritual perspective, from their God perspective. So, we ever had to pay allegiance to the ruler and submit to the official gods and acknowledge the supremacy of a ruler. And that's why we had the church coming in, going into local populations and make Christians of them. That was very important to them. Now, supernatural explanations became more sophisticated with the development of global religions and with the expansion of European exploration. Race was introduced into the us-other relationship. Race was tied to the Christian God, who willed the difference to distinguish between the supreme ruler, nation, and the lesser human like others. So, remember, Israel thought of him as having, as being the, forgotten the word, but as a special nation in relationship to God. And it's not only them, it happened to all of us. So, as stated, race as a function of culture of origin provided humans the exploration, expansion and exploitation mode with this distorted reality of us and them, or us and other. This cultural, intellectual and technological superiority was strengthened by the true superior God and His Son that rightfully handed them the opportunity to bring a good message of salvation to the uninformed souls. And in all fairness, as was determined by fate, exchanged salvation for political and economic power. So they brought the message and they extracted the minerals from them. So, therefore, race was ideally identified to make a moral creationist argument in order to exploit them and threaten their livelihood. So, if you do not conform, you're in trouble. Right, let's move on. The fact is that the concept of race and the fair discrimination associated with it cannot be adequately changed. If a religion that constituted race as valid discriminator is not changed to eliminate the concept of a chosen races and nations. Now this is the nth important fact to remember. You cannot address the race problem, the race narrative, if you do not in parallel address the religion giving that powers to the people. And people are not making that connection. I see it all the time. We're not making that connection. Without that connection, it's impossible to fix the problem. As I said earlier, if you reject evolution completely, you also can't solve the problem. If you don't make the connection between race and religion, you also can't solve the problem. And neither of those are done. So, what do we do if we don't make these connections? And that is what we had with critical race theory. That's why we spent some time on it. Supernatural explanations mold the hypersocial us-other argument about race and racial discrimination. It just molds it. And racial supremacy earned social privilege and a tendency to subject others to our will. Unfortunately, the current hypersocial arguments around race and race identity and race diversity also do a couple of things. They focus only on the Western culture and how liberals and capitalists practice racism and oppression. I don't know if you've noticed that, but they're concentrating on Western culture. You don't see it in Japan, China, you do not. Eroded the rational, reasonable and solid factual evidence enriched, not mentally fabricated facts, which is what they bring us. And they raised the middle ground as well. So it's just two extremes which you have today. The critical race theorists and the, I don't know what to call them, the racists on the other hand. So you're left with this duality which cannot be fixed. So what does hypersocial arguments also do? It strengthens by political power gains and financial gains on both sides. So when we speak about left and right, both sides benefit from it financially. And there's no convergence is tolerated, and propositions that divide are preferred. You cannot bring them together because you will lose your privileges, your financial benefits. That goes for the left and the right, if I may call them that. It is strengthened by the radical side developing academic blessed ideas that reject all ecological sound development theoretical positions. So everything we've discussed here is rejected, and then you can't solve a problem. Even when plausible, and instead rejoice in intermental constructions. So what they construct mentally, and remember we had it in the first lecture where I give a whole history of how it happened and how we got to the dialectic. So, within the race debates, politically played power games, an important goal for them is election winning, and they've got the zombie-like supporters contributing to it. To win, they have changed the physical differences and geographies of origin linked to race into a social demographic victim label. That's what The critical theories do. The minority races are victims, women are victims, and that's what they go with. You have to be a victim, because, as I said here, critical race theory is one of a newly constructed Hypersonian Shingeist that carries a social demographic victim, label that divides people and make no useful contribution towards an amicable solution. CRT are less value than gossip. So I'm saying, and this is the last thing I'm going to say when we're going to take a break, that critical race theory do less for us than do normal gossip. So with that, let's take a short break and then we'll get back to the synthesis. Thank you very much.